changing your life one story at a time. This is the Chicken Soup for the Soul podcast with Editor-in-Chief Amy Newmark.
Hey, it's Amy Newmark, and it's time for some instant inspiration from Chicken Soup for the Soul. So, I don't know about you, but with the holidays approaching, I've been talking to my siblings a lot more as we make plans for November and December. And that led me to a couple of stories in a book we put out a year ago, Chicken Soup for the Soul, Angels and Miracles, which has become a huge bestseller for us. And we just keep printing it and running out and printing more and running out again. So I thought I'd share a couple of stories with you today from that book. And these stories are about that strange but miraculous connection that siblings can have. In our first story, Jolie Lisenby tells us that she had just taken a pregnancy test, and it was positive. She and her husband were ecstatic because just a few months earlier, a fertility specialist had told her that she wouldn't be able to get pregnant. And this was after a year of fertility treatments that hadn't worked. So minutes after she took this positive pregnancy test, the phone rang, and it was her youngest brother, Wade. She and Wade were very close, and they spoke regularly. And their two older brothers like to call them the Witch Mountain twins because they were like the psychic brother and sister in that Disney film because of the way that their thoughts seemed so connected. Jolie's husband saw that it was Wade calling, and he cautioned her, because they didn't want to tell anyone about the pregnancy until some time had passed and they were sure that it was going to stick. So he said, "Don't tell, not even Wade." So Jolie talked to Wade, and she acted as normal as possible, and they talked about some plans to get together. But then after a few minutes, Wade said, "I have to ask you something personal. Are you pregnant?" And Jolie didn't want to tell him because she had promised her husband she wouldn't, so she avoided the question, and she said, "According to the doctor, no, maybe not ever. Why?" And Wade continued, and he said, "This is going to sound crazy, but I've had this feeling all morning. It's almost like I'm remembering a dream, only I didn't dream it. I'm sitting here drinking coffee, and it's like I just know it." And he went on to say that he felt that that weird connection between them, which they always called their spidey senses, was changing. And he said, "Don't get me wrong, it's not that we won't be close anymore, but more like some of that ability is being transferred to a child, your child. I feel like you're going to have a baby soon. I know this sounds crazy, but I just know that you are. Are you sure you're not pregnant?" Well, Jolie was astonished. The moment that she learned she was pregnant, her brother Wade, far away, had somehow known it too. Jolie promised her husband that she wouldn't tell. So she reiterated what the medical experts had told her, that she'd never have a biological child. And Wade just said again, in a voice of absolute certainty, "Well, they're wrong." 4 months later, when Jolie and her husband announced their good news to everyone, Wade said that he knew it all along, but he had kept his mouth shut, figuring that she would just tell him when she was ready. Jolie and her brother Wade still have a special bond. But as he predicted, it is different because now Jolie has a beautiful 6-year-old daughter as well.
The Chicken Soup for the Soul podcast continues straight ahead.
Chicken Soup for the Soul celebrates your pets and the power of the human-animal bond. I'm Robin Gansert, CEO of American Humane and host of the new podcast from Chicken Soup for the Soul, Loving Animals. Every week, I'm joined by celebrities and other special guests who share a passion for spreading care, hope, and compassion for the world's unique species. You'll hear inspiring stories of animal rescue and rehab, plus the latest trends in animal welfare. Chicken Soup for the Soul presents Loving Animals with me, Robin Gansert. Available on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, or anywhere you download your favorite podcast.
In the same Angels and Miracles book, Carol Huff tells us a story about her brother, Ralph. Carol was very close to Ralph. He had been her confidant through some difficult times, and then when he lost his wife, Carol turned around and helped him through his own difficult time, and that brought them even closer. Carol loved all 4 of her brothers, but Ralph was the one that she was the most alike, even though he was 5 years older than her. And Carol and her brother had a special thing about Elmo. You know who Elmo is, right? That red Muppet. And this happened because Carol had bought an Elmo doll at an auction one day when Ralph was with her. And when the auction staff had handed her the Elmo, Ralph had hit the on switch on Elmo's foot, and Elmo started talking and moving around, and Carol couldn't figure out how to get him to stop. So Carol says that she and Ralph laughed so hard that their stomachs hurt. And from then on, they had a special routine. Every morning, they would text each other a message with a picture of Elmo attached. In fact, the day that Ralph died, Carol had received his usual morning text, and this one came with a picture just of Elmo's smiling face. And she texted back as usual, never dreaming that her brother would die that afternoon from a heart attack. She was devastated when he died, and she was looking for some kind of comfort, and a couple of weeks after he died, she was taking hay to her horses and donkeys when she noticed something unusual in the pasture. There was a silver thing, and it turned out it was a partly deflated helium balloon, and it was bouncing across the grass, and it still had a string on it, so Carol guessed that some little kid had let it go, and it had finally landed here in her pasture. She didn't want any of her animals to accidentally eat the balloon, so she went to retrieve it, and as she got close to it, she saw what was on the balloon, and it was Elmo's smiling face, just like that last text message that she received from her brother Ralph. Carol said, "Ralph, is that you?" And the balloon leaned toward her like it was making a curtsy, and then even though it was deflated, it flew back into the air and across the barn and then across the next pasture and then into the woods. And as it went along, it would dip down occasionally as if it were waving at her. Carol watched it for several minutes, just amazed. And it was just what she needed. She started crying, and she said out loud to Ralph, "I got your message." And then she felt better. She felt like Ralph was telling her something. To remember that day that they had laughed so hard that their stomachs hurt, the day that she had bought that Elmo doll at the auction. So from that day on, Carol resolved that she was going to start smiling again, and she was going to find joy in life again. And she says in her story, more than 2 years have passed since Ralph's death, and every time I think of that unexplained helium balloon, it brings a smile to my face. So that's it, siblings and the miraculous connections between them. It's something nice to think about as we head into the holidays. I'm Amy Newmark, and I appreciate you listening today. If you want to learn more about that best-selling book that these stories were in, Chicken Soup for the Soul, Angels and Miracles, visit our website, chickensoup.com, and click on the button that says Podcasts. You'll see all the books that are featured on this week's podcasts, and you can click on their covers, and you can read some great tips drawn from the books. Come back for our next episode when I'll be sharing a couple of stories about kindness in America and why the next time you see a member of our armed services, you should follow that impulse that you might have to buy that man or woman a meal.